Well, thank you, Frank. Thank you for this invitation. I'm really very glad and honored to be here. It's my first time in University of Dundee, my first time in this part of Scotland. I've only been here once for tourist purposes, in Outer Hebrides. So I'll be talking about this very unlikely subject of rumours and gossip. And to take rumours and gossip as a sort of object of philosophical scrutiny seems to be a contradiction in terms. It's true that, as Hegel says, that philosophy can start anywhere. There's no prescribed way where to start philosophy. No non-philosophical subject is there by nature. So it's just important how one does it. It's important that one brings it to the concept. But is there a concept of rumours? It would rather seem that there is an either-or. One either trades in rumours or else one does philosophy. Rumours and philosophy are mutually exclusive. They rule each other out. So what could be further away from the serious business and the dignity of philosophy than dealing with rumours, the hearsay, the gossip, tittle-tattle, the yellow press, slander, calumny? Isn't this a sure way to ruin one's reputation of a philosopher if one deals with such an unworthy, undignified subject? So here I am risking my philosophical reputation, which I think is not a bad thing at all. And I would actually propose to consider rumours as a, God help me, ontological entity. You know that Heidegger spoke at length about the voice of being. So couldn't one suggest the rumour of being? The rumour of the gossip of being. And Frank actually just sent me a link to a website on Higgs boson, you know, the God's particle, and there is a sort of explanation, animation, how to explain what this Higgs boson, this mysterious thing is. Well, what is it? How does it work? And the explanation, imagine a cocktail party and the gossip spreading there. So there is a sort of ontological gossip, even on the level of the elementary, of the subatomic particles. So you can't do ontology without gossip, as it were. So philosophy started with a divide, by drawing a line, a sharp opposition between what in Greek times was called doxa and episteme. Doxa is the regime of opinions, anybody is entitled to an opinion, and there is no compelling necessity that opinions should be firmly grounded. They just depend on anybody's private views, tastes, and preferences. One can say, I see the things in this way. This is my opinion. And as one cannot argue about tastes, so ultimately one can't seriously argue about opinions, although one constantly does. One cannot seriously argue because they're based on a personal stance. I think so, I feel so, I see it this way, I believe so, and they are ultimately tautological. I think so because I think so. And my personal opinion is my freedom and indeed my right, and even the much celebrated freedom of opinion. As opposed to this, episteme is knowledge that has to be epistemologically grounded, not my personal preference, not a tautology, but it has to be grounded in the thing itself. So knowledge aims at truth, and truth is universal and binding, not a matter of mere opinion. Knowledge has to be legitimized. It has to be justified. It has to be based on factual evidence, on impartial objectivity, and ultimately grounded in logos. And let's say the logos is the big other that should vouchsafe for the legitimate proper knowledge. Let's say that the logos is the early Greek name for what Lacan, 2,500 years later, would call the big other, the guarantee. The guarantee of knowledge in its universality, in its binding character, the sort of transcendental guarantee, the authority we have to assume in order to be able to speak at all. So the stark opposition between doxa and episteme, between opinion and knowledge, goes back to the Socratic foundations of philosophy. And Socrates famously spent his time dismantling people's opinions, destroying them, showing their absence of foundation. And all it took was asking a couple of awkward questions, and this was his favorite occupation. Now, rumours stand even lower in rank compared to opinions. For one thing that one can say in favor of opinions is that at least people subscribe to them. They take them as their possession, they even take pride in them, they take them as their expression. The freedom of expression is reputedly inalienable. Whereas with rumors, what defines them is that nobody subscribes to them. I heard that something. People say that. It has been suggested that. The rumor has it. And I particularly like this English phrase, the rumor has it. I would put the stress on the last part of it. The rumor has it. You know, the Freudian id. There is some id which is at stake in rumors. And in my own language, in Slovene, you have even the expression, the sort of impersonal expression, which could be translated as it speaks. Ça parle, no, it speaks. So how does the it speaks of rumors relate to the famous Lacanian notion of ça parle, it speaks in the unconscious? So rumors have no author. They just circulate anonymously, as if by themselves, as if neutrally, impersonally, as the breeze of air stemming from nowhere, enveloping us and passing on. And on the way, the breeze easily turns into a tempest. And this image, this metaphor of a breeze turning into a tempest actually was one of the ruling metaphors through the history of rumors. And I will take you through a bit of the cultural history of rumors. They have no assignable origin. They come from an unspecified place and are just passed on. There is no originator of a rumor. One just hears it and passes it on as a relay. Of course, there are rumors that are intentionally invented and systematically spread, but they only function as rumors as long as they seemingly have no author. But if rumors have no author, it doesn't follow that they have no authority. Quite the opposite. By being impersonal and anonymous without a proper origin, they carry all the more an inscrutable, intractable kind of authority. There is like a mysterious conversion, a sort of transubstantiation that takes place with rumors. There is no proof, no origin, no author, no guarantee, but nevertheless, they are mystically transformed into an unfathomable force that is very hard or virtually impossible to combat. Being without a foundation, they nevertheless work. Their efficiency stands in stark contrast to their lack of support. Everybody knows that this is a mere rumor, unfounded, grounded on thin air, but one cannot stop oneself from lending it an ear and allowing it to work. You know that Octave Manoni, in a famous paper from 1964, proposed the notorious formula, je sais bien mais quand même, I know very well, but nevertheless. So the rumors present a sort of vintage case of this formula. I know very well this is a mere rumor, but nevertheless. There may be something to it, or at least it's intriguing, it's entertaining. Or maybe some people may get hurt by this and get into trouble. So let me sort of, for the time being, participate in this, although I know very well that there is ultimately nothing to it. Or is it? And since nobody subscribes to them, there's always, I'm not maintaining this myself. This is just a rumor I heard. They exactly fit another formula, which was elaborated by Robert Fowler, which is beliefs without owners. It's a very interesting phenomenon. The beliefs that nobody actually believes in, but which are being circulated. So it looks as if rumors present another face of the big other, not the face of logos, of truth, but something that nobody quite believes to be true, yet it unfailingly works and is given a questionable credence and general currency. There is a kind of paradoxical reversal with this sort of big other. The more it appears fickle, unfounded, frivolous, untrustworthy, unsubstantiated, the more it presents the big other in its pure form, overpowering precisely because of its lack of proper foundation, not despite of it. It is given a space to rule against everyone's better knowledge. It is as if we have here two faces of the big other, standing opposite each other, with no common measure. On the one hand, the big other that can and should provide epistemological foundation and guarantee of proper knowledge, based on logos and aiming at truth, and on the other hand, the big other based on nothing but hearsay, on the wind, and nevertheless standing fast and sticking. And this is the thing with rumours. They stick. They stick whether one wants them to or not. They leave their mark, which seems to be ineffaceable. So these two faces of the big other have nothing in common, the solemnity of logos, the triviality of hearsay, yet could one say that the big other is a sort of Janus-faced creature, Janus, you know, the Greek, the Roman double-faced deity, the god of boundaries and transitions, with two faces inseparably grown together. Shall we say the big other and its shadow? Or shall we say the big other and its double? Now the career of Socrates was suspended in a really emblematic, iconic way precisely between these two figures of the big other. For on the one hand, his principal ambition was to dismantle all unfounded opinions and firmly point them in the direction of the search for truth, the proper foundation of logos. But on the other hand, the rumours were his undoing, the lever of his fall, the origin of his trial and ultimately of his death. So when Socrates was standing in front of the Athenian tribunal in 399 BC, this is what he said at the beginning of his apology. I quote, "There have been many who have accused me to you for many years now, and none of the accusations are true. These I fear much more than I fear Anytus and his friends," the present identifiable accusers. "Those who spread the rumors, gentlemen, are my dangerous accusers. Moreover, these accusers are numerous and have been at it a long time. What is most absurd in all this is that one cannot even know or mention their names. Those who maliciously and slanderously persuaded you, all those are most difficult to deal with. One cannot bring one of them into court or refute them. One must simply fight with shadows, as it were, in making one's defense, and cross-examine when no one answers. Very well then, I must surely defend myself and attempt to uproot from your minds in so short a time the slander that has resided there so long." The end of quote. So here you have this exemplary, dramatic situation. Socrates, who fought the false opinion, promoted the way to truth based on logos more than anyone else in history, to the point that he became the model, the beacon of this struggle. The same Socrates was powerless against the power of rumors that had been spreading against him for many years and had no basis whatsoever. Yet they resulted in the indictment, in the trial, sentence, and death. He could easily fight the visible opponents, but the ones he couldn't fight were the invisible ones, who paved the way for the visible ones. It's like fighting shadows, but shadows won the day. The other face of the big other, based on rumors, on hearsay, on slander, got the upper hand over its glorious face of logos, truth, and epistemology. It turned out that logos was helpless against rumors. The faceless anonymous avalanche won against the best of arguments. So this is sort of a vintage case. The other big other, is more powerful than the official and celebrated one. Rumors, trivial, unfounded as they are, have the capacity to outwit logos, which seems to be no match for them. And even the wisest of men, and this is what the Delphic oracle said about Socrates, had to concede defeat. There is a Latin adage, "Audacitor calumniare semper aliquid heret." Slander boldly, something always sticks. Spread rumors audaciously, some of it will always suffice. So this adage actually stems from Francis Bacon, but this formula, which turned into a proverb, was his paraphrase of a passage from Plutarch. So however unfounded they are, rumors always leave a stain, and the stain is virtually impossible to erase. There is some sort of magical thinking in the functioning of rumors, namely the belief that one can affect people and things with the mere unfounded words. The words have the capacity to stain what they refer to, even if they are completely inaccurate and unjustified. Whatever one ascribes to people in rumors will start functioning as their as if virtual, real quality. And no amount of argument can undo this smear. One can spread rumors that this person is a crook and he will inevitably be somehow virtually qualified as such, helplessly framed, and with rumors one is always already in a defensive position. So one is always on the defense. So affecting things with words, by mere referring, by mere naming. This is the magical kind of belief. There's a magical belief at the bottom of this, and this is the magic that works. Strangely, this works. So there is a whole history which testifies to this indomitable, irresistible power of rumors, a history of bemoaning and lamenting the unfairness, the utter injustice of it. One is innocent, then the rumors are spread, and one is suddenly in a position of protesting one's innocence in vain. For even if everybody knows that rumors are false, they have nevertheless managed to demolish and spoil one's innocence without one doing anything wrong. They frame their victim in such a way that the victim cannot simply step out of this frame. Everybody knows, but also everybody secretly believes that there must be something to it, that the word has the capacity not only to nominate its referent, but to produce the spectre of something that isn't there. The laments and complaints about this are countless. So let me briefly give just 3 prominent examples marking different eras. It's like a brief course in the cultural history of rumors, but it can actually amount to a thick book if one wanted to. First, Shakespeare. There are a dozen and more places where Shakespeare actually refers to this. So I will just give 2 quotes, and one is from Hamlet. And Hamlet talks to Ophelia after the grand scene of his soliloquy. And, there's a very brutal exchange. He's insulting, humiliating her. And among other things, he says the following: "If thou dost marry, I'll give thee this plague for thy dowry. Be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, thou shalt not escape calumny. Get thee to the nunnery, farewell." So, no amount of chastity and purity will save her. There is no way she could protect herself against the calumny and the rumors, and this is the only dowry that Hamlet can think of to give her for her possible future marriage. "You shall be stained if you stay in this filthy world, stained by the calumnious words and rumors, and it appears that a nunnery would then function as a possible safe haven against this ubiquitous stain." But the situation is actually very ambiguous and double-edged. Does he want to protect her innocence from calumnious filth? Or isn't it rather that by the very way of addressing her, he himself produces the calumny, the stain that he is warning her about, the stain from which she will never recover? Isn't it rather that he, her lover, is the source of the calumny he allegedly wants to protect her from? By treating her, like a whore and sending her to a nunnery. But how could she ever escape this by going to a nunnery? Virtue cannot escape calumny, but by giving her this warning as her dowry, Hamlet actually thereby undoes her virtue himself. So it's a poisoned dowry. And this is, I won't go further into this scene. You know the scene. It's a sort of condensation of his troubled mind. And the troubled mind, Hamlet's troubled mind, is Shakespeare's diagnosis of a certain verge of modernity. I will leave out the other example, which is the second part of Henry IV. Actually begins by a prologue, and the prologue is told by the rumour. The rumour comes on stage and tells the prologue. This could be commented further, but I leave this out. I just have another example from Shakespeare from which actually the title of this talk stems, and this is from the happy ending of the Comedy of Errors. There the abbess says the following, I quote, "The Duke, my husband, and my children both, and you, the calendars of their nativity, go to a gossip's feast, enjoy with me, after so long grief, such felicity." To which the Duke responds, "With all my heart, I'll gossip at this feast." So, what does it mean? What is the gossip's feast? What can this possibly be? And actually the word in this context doesn't have the usual association. If you look at the etymological dictionary, the English word gossip stems from God-sib, which is godfather, godmother, baptismal sponsor, literally a person related to one in God, not a blood relative, from God, and sib, like sibling, relative. So in Middle English, the sense was a close friend, a person with whom one gossips. Hence, a person who gossips, which is the idle talk, which is the meaning which emerged only in the 19th century. So gossip refers to what? To a company of people who are not related by blood. There is a spiritual community, a social community connecting them. And what else can a spiritual community devote itself to but gossip? So gossip is the tie beyond blood, beyond social hierarchies. It's the sort of horizontal sociality, the joy, the feast of gossiping. Some like from God to gossip, there is just a small step. But what appears here as partaking in the feast of a joyful community has the nasty tendency of sliding into the sinister part, the sinister side of gossip. And actually, Alenka Zupancic, who I believe will be coming here next month, she commented briefly on this in her book on comedy, saying that gossip's feast was unwittingly heading towards the new horizon of meaning in the time of the postmodern big other. So it's the word which was waiting there. And I quote just one sentence from her book. Did the signifiers at that time long past already know the direction in which their new meaning would evolve? So there was this gossip's feast, meaning one kind of thing, but through a slide of a verge of modernity, an entry of modernity, and through a long slide to the postmodern big other to which I will come. In the end, this is the words that were waiting there in Lure for us to pick up in another time with another meaning. So gossip's feast and the present times, this will be our guiding line. Now, my second example stems from the time of the Enlightenment. 170 years later, there's this comedy called The Barber of Seville. This is the high day of Enlightenment. This was originally a comedy written by Beaumarchais, Le Barbier de Séville, and it was first staged in 1775 with a huge success. It did one of the most successful comedies of the 18th century. And the paradigmatic Enlightenment comedy from the time leading up to the French Revolution. But this original comedy was doubly overshadowed. First by Beaumarchais himself, who wrote a sequel to it, which is the notorious Le Mariage de Figaro, the Figaro's Wedding, which was first staged in 1784. And this sequel outdid this first installment. And, well, you know, Figaro's Wedding was one of the most explosive pieces at the time. If one is to believe Napoleon's opinion, Figaro is revolution in action. And there would be no French Revolution without it. Then it was doubly overshadowed. The second overshadowing was done by Rossini, who in 1816 wrote the famous opera Barbiere di Sevilla, which is one of the most successful, most frequently produced operas of all times. But what interests me is just one particular scene, one particular aria. So in this plot, very briefly, this Don Bartolo, a lecherous old man, wants to marry his young protégée Rosina, and he has a formidable adversary in this Count Almaviva, who is also very much in love with her, etc. So at one point, this Don Bartolo seeks advice from his friend Don Basilio. What would be the best means to avert his rival? And Don Basilio has just one advice to give, which is calumny. Calumny can destroy anyone. And here, then, I don't know to what extent you're opera lovers. If you ever heard Barbiere di Sevilla, the Rossini version, there is a wonderful aria on the powers of calumny. The whole aria just deals with the powers of calumny. It's one of the most famous bass buffo arias. And I'll give you just some very brief excerpts in English. Calumny, this is how it starts. Calumny is a little breeze, a gentle zephyr, which insensibly, subtly, lightly and sweetly commences to whisper softly, softly, here and there. Sotto voce. It just begins like this. And then it's like a crescendo. It's a huge crescendo. It's a crescendo aria. And at the height of it, finally, with crack and crash, it spreads afield, its force redoubled. It produces an explosion like the outburst of a cannon, an earthquake, a whirlwind, a general uproar, which makes the air resound. And the poor slandered wretch, vilified, trampled down, sunk beneath the public lash by good fortune, falls to death. This is the end of the aria. It's a wonderful aria. We don't, okay, I didn't bring the, if you don't know it, listen to it. So why I'm bringing this up, if Calumny, if the Rumours ever had a eulogy, a panegyric, a song of praise, an anthem, this is the anthem of Calumny, you know. This is the one. So it's a showcase for bass buffo, starting with a very gentle piano and developing in an overwhelming crescendo to a fortissimo climax, come colpa di cannone, like the outburst of a cannon. And then ends on this gentle tone, cheerfully, maliciously enjoying the inevitable downfall of this poor victim, his death. And these musical directions, like from pianissimo, piano, piano, and crescendo, and etc., actually they stem already from Beaumarchais' prose text. So the prose text was just waiting to be put to music. So what is this second example? It's a very different kind of example. We are at the age of enlightenment, at the glorious height of enlightenment. So given the optimism of the age, the power of calumny and rumors actually fails for once. So the biggest irony with this aria is that after extolling so persuasively the gigantic powers of calumny, irresistible powers, all this acclaimed calumny in the plot miserably fails in the end. True love wins. The pernicious and malicious stratagems of the depraved Ancien Regime, and the Ancien Regime is somehow equated with this calumny, they are defeated. Also with the help of the skills and intrigues of the shrewd servant Figaro, a self-made man for the new age. So the message is now quite the opposite. Calumny and rumors can be outwitted. And no doubt one can detect in the background the ultimate faith in the triumphant powers of reason, which can be the match even for the invincible forces of calumny and rumors. So one big other wins over the other one, of this shadowy big other. Reason wins over its shadowy double. And this is the moment of the Enlightenment. My third example, now we are moving quickly through, just giving a very brief sort of sketches. My third example is predictably less optimistic, and it brings us to modern times. If we open Kafka's Trial on page 1 and read the first sentence, this is what it says. Someone must have been spreading rumors against Joseph K. For one morning, without having done anything wrong, he was arrested. So I just stay with this first sentence. Jemand musste Joseph K. verleumdet haben. And for verleumden, the dictionary gives us to slander, to calumniate, to vilify, to defame, to denigrate, to malign, to backbite. So this is one of the most famous opening sentences in German literature, or indeed in the whole world literature. So in the beginning there was what? There was not the word logos as in Bible, not the act as with Faust. In beginning there was a rumor. So here we have in sort of paradigmatic form these two versions of the big other. In the beginning there was logos versus in the beginning there was a rumor, which is to be sure also a word, but emphatically not the word, not logos, anything but. So two kinds of word face each other. In the beginning there was a word, but which word? Was it logos or rumor? How to tell them apart? So rumors by definition have no author. So there is some unspecified someone, jemand, who can never be brought to light and identified. It's a word coming from nowhere, yet overpowering. And one can appreciate that the situation of Joseph K. is analogous to that of Socrates. Socrates as well was the victim of rumors spreading anonymously for a long time, eventually resulting in the arrest and the charge of the trial. But with Socrates, at least we know what the rumors were, or at least what the accusations against him were: the corruption of views, the disregard for the days of the city, for the power structures, etc. And the peculiar thing with Joseph K. is that we never learn what the allegations were, what he was charged with. Indeed, he was never even charged. And there was actually no trial, apart from one sort of curious interrogation. So the title is kind of a misnomer. There was no trial. So Joseph K. never had the opportunity to present his apology before the court, like Socrates. But their separate fates came together in the end, at the point of execution. Socrates drinking the Hamlet, and Joseph K. slaughtered with a knife, like a dog. So they were both killed in the end on the basis of something that started as a mere rumor. One can say slander cause disastrous effects. And mark the pun. If I ever publish this paper, it can perhaps be called Slander Causes. No. Slander. Just depends how you write it. So with Kafka, we have the darkest version of the rumors. They stand at the origin. They stand for the absent origin. They don't need to be specified. They don't need to be spelled out. They don't need to be substantiated anyway. There is just rumor as such, in its pure form. And all one can say about it is that it was in some way directed against Joseph K. It's a rumor without content and without a substance. It's the pure other other face of the big other. It doesn't need any content to work. It just works as an instigating moment. And it instigates a process. Indeed, it's called a process in German, which is unstoppable. So what is a mere slander, a very slander, is magnified then by what? By the law, by the court, becoming a whirlwind against which there is no possible defense. How could one defend oneself when there is no charge? So, if the shadowy side of the big other is overwhelming, then its first side, the side of logos, has as if gone into hiding. The court, the institution which is supposed to be based on law and ultimately on logos, the harbinger of logos in a chaotic society, the big other which should resolve any dispute, the court is entirely taken hostage by the other side of logos, hostage of rumors. So the court is just a receding entity, omnipresent but nowhere to be seen. Just like the castle. I mean, both the court and the castle, they are subject to rumors. You can never actually see them. You can never actually confront them. So the two sides of the big other have been amalgamated, not by some compromise or middle ground, but by one swallowing the other. Logos part became the extension of its shadow. And one more thing. The rumor, the calumny, the slander, the Verleumdung, which initiated it all, is mentioned only once, only in the first sentence. The novel never comes back to this, to the alleged origin of the trial. There are no clues whatsoever as to who this someone might have been. Moreover, there's something very curious about this famous first sentence. Namely, the whole novel is written from the perspective of Joseph K., except for this first sentence. The supposition of someone spreading rumors is not presented as K's own assumption. The sentence suggests that this is the suggestion of an objective narrator, who also further confidently affirms in the same sentence Joseph K. has done nothing wrong. In which case the objective narrator is there only to throw the first stone, and then he disappears. From here on, we only see things with Joseph K.'s eyes, and K. doesn't have the privilege of the bird's eye view of these objective narrators. And there's, I only mentioned that the prologue in the second part of Henry IV is actually told by the rumour. Actually, there is a structural analogy. Also, the rumour only appears on stage in the first scene as a prologue and then disappears. So it's instigating the whole thing. Now, if we were to make a guess as to who it might have been that has been spreading rumours about K, then maybe the most consistent hypothesis would be that there can be no other than Joseph K himself. And this is the line of thought pursued by Giorgio Agamben in his paper K, where he also points out that the letter K, the letter K, may well stand for calumny, calumnia spelled with K in Old Latin, and that false accusation was an abominable crime in Roman law, and the perpetrators were actually branded with the letter K on their body. And Kafka himself was, a lawyer, very knowledgeable about the Roman law. Thus, Joseph K could well be himself the great calumniator, branded as K for bringing the false accusation against himself. So we are at one further remove from the Hamlet example. The Hamlet's warning about calumny ultimately hit Ophelia in the guise of her alleged protection, whereas Joseph K may well be the originator of the calumny himself, that hit nobody but himself, ruined him, and brought about his end. So in matters of calumny, there has been a progress from Hamlet to Kafka. Now, before coming to present times, I'll give you one more quote, one more example, which is a very different tenor. Most of the references to Rumours fall into the big category of laments about the crushing power against which reason, proofs, and argument are helpless. And actually, this then becomes a sort of recurring cliché. But this quote takes things from a very different angle. It's a quote which stems from Cervantes. Not from Don Quixote, but from his exemplary tales. And this particular story is called The Deceitful Wedding, El Casamiento Engañoso, and it contains a very famous part which is known as the Dialogue of the Dogs. It is one of the showcases of Spanish literature. So, well, briefly, one of the protagonists of the story is in hospital, sort of delirious, and during the night he overhears two old dogs having a conversation. And he meticulously memorizes everything, as Cervantes says, his memory being so good because he ate a lot of raisins and almonds. So he could write it down word by word in the morning. So these two dogs, Scipion and Berganza, and they want to tell the stories of their lives to each other in the idleness of the deep night. But the two dogs are not like the animals from fables, who can just talk without any further ado. The two dogs are actually both very conscious that the gift of speech they have been given is very special. So throughout the dialogue, they keep reflecting on the nature of speech, on its function, its peculiarities, its pitfalls, its powers. And one dog, Berganza, who is telling the story of his life to the other, recounting the adventures of his dog's life, the troubles with the past masters, etc., whenever he goes into these stories, he cannot quite refrain from engaging in slander, in gossip, in denigration. So he's constantly rebuked by the other dog to go careful, that there is this propensity of language. So this dog, Berganza, says the following, and I find this absolutely astounding. This is really a beautiful, beautiful quote. He says, "To be sure, Scipio, a man has to be very wise and very circumspect if one wants to sustain 2 hours' conversation without his words bordering on gossip. For I find in myself, although I'm an animal, that I have only to open my mouth a few times before the words come rushing to my tongue, like flies to wine, and all of them malicious and slanderous. And so I repeat what I've said before, that we inherit our evil words and deeds from our earliest ancestors, and we ingest them with our mother's milk. This is clearly seen in the way a child has barely got his arm out of his swaddling clothes when he raises his fist as if to avenge himself on the person he thinks has offended him, and almost the first word he articulates is to call his nurse or mother a whore. End of quote. So you have a certain theory of language implied in this dog's reflection. And to follow this suggestion, first, we unpack this. And gossip, the rumors, the slander is not some sort of minor deplorable deviation from what speech usually is or should properly be, but rather pertains to the basic function of speech. No speech without gossip, from the moment one opens one's mouth. There is no function of referring or mutual description of objective account without gossip immediately sneaking in. It's rather the opposite of what is taken for granted. The usual function of speech, the function of communication and information, is already premised on the basic stance of slander and insult. To speak is to speak maliciously. To speak is to gossip. And to spread rumors, to speak is to denigrate. Indeed, where would we be if we were only to prefer confirmed information and sound statements? We wouldn't last a minute if we were confined to the sentences like "the cat is on the mat" that the analytical philosophy is so fond of. Actually, maybe we would cease to be human if this were the case. And okay, this is a suggestion taken from literature, from Cervantes, but you have serious anthropologists and psychologists maintaining this hypothesis. I actually recommend this book, Robin Dunbar, which is called Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language. He's a serious guy. This is Harvard University Press. Like, this is not gossip. And the guy has a serious theory that, well, gossip is the origin of language. I mean, grooming is a very powerful agent in monkey societies of establishing social bonds, hierarchies. So in this light, for him, language would be grooming at a distance, a very effective form of grooming. And he also lists a lot of empirical research which allegedly shows that 2/3 of the time we use language to gossip, to talk about social networking, establishing the in-groups and the out-groups, the personal experience, the behavior of the others, 2/3 of the time. And this was done by empirical scientists, recording conversations, etc. We spend on something that could be put in the wide category of rumors and gossip. This is what language is empirically used for. So, in this view, communication and information are but an attempt of taming, of domesticating, and playing down what speech originally is, a cover-up of what speech is at its minimal, namely gossip. We don't need language to impart information. After all, animals somehow manage that part quite well. We need language in order to gossip, and this is the one thing that animals can't do. You know that Roman Jakobson famously proposed 6 basic functions of language, but one cannot find the function of gossip on the list. It's because, I guess, the linguists are too polite, they're too idealistic, they believe in communication. Cervantes' dogs have a more realistic view of things, and they are, if one might say so, capable of adopting a more materialist standpoint. So of one view of language, people basically like each other. They want to communicate, they want to collaborate, they want to exchange useful information. So communication is the name of the game. And on the other view of language, which is advocated by the 2 dogs, people basically, hate each other. They use language as a weapon. They can hardly wait to gossip, to slander, to throw insults, to hurt, to offend. So whom shall we follow, Jakobson or Berganza? We have 2 competing sort of views of what language basically is. The polite linguist versus the Spanish dog of the 17th century. So the dog suggests that the evil words and deeds, the malice and slander, come naturally. We ingest them with the mother's milk, this time from our earliest ancestors. And no doubt what lurks at the bottom of this idea is the idea of the original sin, committed by Adam and Eve, whose progeny we are. So we are heirs to the fall. And in the Slovene translation of this novella, there is a footnote here where the translator actually points out that dogs as animals, after all, do not stem from Adam and Eve. So they are not prey to the fall. So how come that they have this strange idea that we ingest, with our mother's milk, the original sin, and therefore we slander? And I think from this we can extrapolate a very basic thesis, then namely that the gift of language, which they so heatedly debate, is what constitutes man's fall. Language is our original sin, and hence its natural and spontaneous propensity to gossip. So its basic function is to spread unfounded malicious rumors, and one cannot speak for any length of time without this zero function of language coming to surface, sneaking in, however much one tries to keep it at bay. No neutral communication, no neutral information, no language without gossip, ever since the fall. But the fall is language itself. And if I say no language without gossip, then I'll add, a parochial comment on my own mother tongue, in Slovene. In Slovene, this is really very peculiar because the word for rumors, which is govorica, usually mostly in plural, like govorice, is the same as the word for language. We have the same word. We have three words for this. Jezik, which is language, govor, which is speech, and then there is a generic term, which is govorica, like langage in French. And this generic term coincides with the word for rumors. So in Slovene, the gift of speech actually coincides with the gift of rumors, to the point of there's a speculative unity, to the point that you cannot tell them apart. And I haven't done any etymological research, but as far as I know, no other language. It is not so in other languages. Rumour comes from Latin rumour, which is noise. In German, you have Gerücht, which comes actually from rufen, from calling. In Serbo-Croatian, you have glasine, which comes from voice. In Russian, you have sluhi, which comes from hearing. So every other language needs a sort of metaphorical term to express what rumors are. But it's only in Slovene that the language is the metaphor of rumors from the start. One more thing. One should also carefully distinguish between insult and gossip. And I think this is where this canine theory of language goes wrong. They are amalgamated. Insults are launched at interlocutors, at the addressees of speech, like the infant calling his nurse or mother a whore. But gossip essentially concerns people who are absent. One cannot gossip about the interlocutor in his presence, so gossip is always based on a community of speakers at the expense of those who are absent. In absentia, if we give a completely different twist to this Saussurian term. So gossip is insult at one remove. It's a reflected insult, an insult that has disentangled itself from the immediacy of a speech situation and has been relegated to the reference to the absent. So gossipers form a community based on exclusion. And the reference to the third parties, conveniently absent, provides the safety, the protection from exposure, the glue that ties together this gossiping community. So maybe the humanizing act would then be the transition of speech from insult to gossip. So only in gossip, then, language acquires this function of founding a community. Insults can be taken as an extension of hostilities that animals also launch at each other. But gossip is something specifically human function. Now, looking back at what I have been proposing all along, the two sides of the big other, its official, the logos side, and its shadowy side, the logos side and the rumor side, we can see that according to this canine theory of language, the shadow comes first, preceding what is supposed to be the shadow of. There is no big other that wouldn't be contaminated by its shadow from the outset. The official side comes late, trying to cover up this preceding shadow, but never quite managing. It tries to present it as a mere shadow, a deviation of logos, its unfortunate straying away. It tries to protest its own innocence, putting all blame on this malicious other. And the two dogs also have themselves a theory of philosophy and its relation to rumours. And this is one further and final quote from Cervantes. One dog says to the other, "Be careful, Berganza, that this urge to philosophize, which you say has come over you, is not a temptation of the devil. For gossip has no subtler veil to soften and conceal its dissolute wickedness than for the gossip monger to claim that every word he utters contains the wisdom of a philosopher. That speaking ill of people is justifiable reproof, and exposing the defects of our fellows is a worthy and conscientious act." Okay, end of quote. So in this account, what is the theory of philosophy implied in this? The philosophy is the higher kind of gossip. It is gossip in disguise. It's pretending to be morally elevated, well-founded. Temptation of the devil is not merely to give in to gossip and its lures. There's even a greater temptation, the philosophical temptation, namely to present gossip as a philosophical wisdom, as logos itself, that has deceptively cut its umbilical cord with gossip and can now reign free in its seeming universality and ideas. The temptation to rationalize and legitimize rumors, to purify them rather than to discard them. So, in this way, philosophy would be, in the words of this dog, the devil's subtlest veil. So, what the problem of logos would be in this perspective, it's an unavowed, disavowed enjoyment in gossip and rumors, its complicity with them, the impossibility to cut itself loose. So that these two sides of the big other, seemingly in stark opposition, in no common measure, are actually secretly bound together, tacitly support each other. And one should be reminded of the Lacanian adage here that there is no other of the other. Now I'm coming finally to present times, okay, in conclusion. Where does this leave us? What does this amount to? Now, I have some news, bad news, good news, old news. Namely, there is a rumor going around that the big other doesn't exist. You know that this is an old Lacanian adage, that this is one of the great Lacanian sort of slogans. You know? The other lacks, the other is barred. There's a lack in the other. Ultimately, it doesn't exist. And this is what psychoanalysis is supposed to teach you. This is what you are supposed to learn from engaging in analytical process. But, well, the non-existence of the big other, this doesn't quite prevent it from having consequences, having effects. It may not exist, but the consequences of this lack insist. We are bound by them. It's not that it gives us the free hand of anything goes. And it doesn't simply follow that one of the two big others lacks, so it could be reduced to the other one. Maybe the very fact that it is split in two is already a consequence of this lack. And what holds them together is their mutual lack. Now, one wrong conclusion to draw from this would be the cynical one. The big other, the one based on logos and truth, doesn't exist. Its reality is actually the malicious spread of rumors, the gossip function of language, from which the dogs cannot detach themselves, and the logos cannot detach themselves from them. And let's admit it, we are all red under the skin, we all enjoy gossip and rumors, even though we know very well, not even though, but all the more since we know very well, that this has no foundation and no truth value. It does its job, like hurting people. It produces enjoyment, like schadenfreude. It produces networking. So no reason to feel bad, it's just the way it is. And it's the basic function of language and sociality anyway. So the philosophical logos is but its disguise, vainly pretending to be something else. All reality is then the doggy reality. That's what it amounts to. That is what it boils down to. There is no big other would then mean that. And this is then the tenet that's symmetrical to the philosophical one, which maintains that only the true big other of logos exists, while the shadowy one has no consistency in just a contingent occasional deviation, a shadow. Okay, so this is one very wrong conclusion to draw from this adage, the big other doesn't exist. The big other doesn't exist. I take this, I mean, there's been quite some literature, Lacanian literature, which is it can be taken as a kind of slogan of present times, or a starting point of a certain diagnosis, a shorthand for so many processes. What defines the modernity? A certain process of decline of the big other since, let's say, Figaro's times. The decline of big other, the decline of traditional authorities, which have lost their sway, the decline of the paternal function, no more patriarchal fathers to provide the law, to the rules of whose word will be obeyed. The institutions have lost their authority. There has been this downfall of sovereignty. Okay, there's a Foucauldian way of telling this story. The decline of institutions, starting with the church and continuing with parliaments and political parties. The laws and moral precepts have become negotiable. The transcendental guarantees have met their demise. The difference between knowledge and opinion has gradually collapsed. And just look at any TV discussion where you have this preposterous, picturesque opinions, rumors taken on the same level with knowledge and research. There's this general leveling of the two. And actually, opinions and knowledge, the two entities that philosophy starkly opposed at its birth, have both increasingly become the manifestations of the third entity, which is the rumours, functioning as their middle term, middle ground, common ground, the mediator. We have been rumorized. Rumours carry the day. Likewise, the distinction between the public and the private, and public was traditionally the place of the big other, the domain of the big other, has been increasingly collapsing, to the point that I don't know, the internet is the great levelizer of the private and the public. It's just the two things merge and cannot be told apart. There's the rumours are the general backdrop. And through the 20th century, this process has been enhanced and magnified, first by the avalanche of media in all their forms and increasing sway, the mediatization of the world at large, and continued with the internet as the century was approaching its end, then reaching the high point with the social media, with the Facebook, the Instagram, the forums, the blogs. So there's nothing like internet and social media to spread rumors instantly and in vast quantities. And particularly now with robots, one doesn't even need the human agency. And robots spread the rumors and to statistically targeted audiences. I mean, there's a general rumorization. The time can be described as a time of a general rumorization. And I would just remind that 20 years ago, internet was a harbinger of a certain optimism, or let's say the Enlightenment optimism, that we have reached, got a device which gives us instant access to objective information and which facilitates communication between anyone, all persons in the world. So information and communication and the prospect of emancipation and democratization through this. And in the 20 years, in the past quarter of a century, we have come to, from this side of the big other, this promise of enlightenment, internet as in the service of the enlightenment, we have come to the entirely on the other side, on the flip side of internet being the biggest spreader of the rumors. And it seems that it's like itself a double-edged entity, the Janus, the Janus-faced, the communication and information on the one hand, and the rumors on the other. So, in my previous terms, there is a slide from Jakobson to Berganza. We started with Jakobson. There would be so much communication information. We finished with Berganza. Okay, so there's this slide towards this shadowy, calumnious other side of the big other, which again seems to be winning the day. It's like a cumulative whirlwind, this escalating vortex, which seems to be pointing in one direction. It can be summed up with this shorthand: there is no big other. The big other doesn't exist. And now if I mention this terrible name, Trump, it seems to me that in this respect, Trump is the biggest Lacanian around. I mean, in the sense that I think that all his pronouncement can actually be summed up by this very simple phrase: the big other doesn't exist. It all boils down to this, there's no big other. Like fake news, I mean, what does it mean? It means any inconvenient piece of news or fact or information is equated with rumors, relegated to the unsubstantiated rumors. Is just another rumor. I mean, the postfactual means this discussion about the postfactual is the effect of the general rumorization. Any facts have alternative facts. And so he is also, okay, the biggest Hegelian around. Because you know that Hegel has once been, somebody confronted Hegel with saying, but Herr Professor, facts contradict your theory, to which Hegel famously replied, umso schlimmer für die Fakten, so much the worse for the facts. So now I'm coming to my conclusion, if this can be a conclusion. What are we to do? I mean, those of us who are Lacanians and Hegelians, as I somehow try to be. When we have such a formidable, high-placed ally, enthusiastic supporter, who seems to be practicing this sort of, a certain kind of Lacanianism and Hegelianism on a daily basis. I will conclude on another gloomy kind of, on a bad news. Namely, the bad news that this rumor about the demise of the big other, that there is no big other, there's been decline of the big other in modern times, that this may perhaps be another piece of fake news. I think there is something very wrong with this diagnosis. This summing up of our predicament with this shorthand, there is no big other, it has collapsed, with the declines of authorities, of knowledge, of sovereignty, of all this. I think maybe our predicament is far bigger. Not that the big other has dwindled and lost all authority, but that it is, in a way, alive and well and has become intractable, that it has become intact. So, but this big other, which has become stronger, actually, the more we talk about the fall of the big other, the decline of the big other, the stronger it has become. This is not a traditional big other of logos, of the patriarchal authority, of the symbolic order of knowledge. It's an unfathomable big other of our socio-economic order, its globalized power structure, the framework of our capitalist universe, so that the more we lament that there is no big other, there is no big other anymore, the more powerful it has become. The more any particular other can be reduced to rumours, can be reduced to this side of the shadowy side of the big other, the more the big other rules supreme. And again, I will quote Alenka, announcing also her talk, whatever, next month. I mean, come to her talk by all means. She has this in one of her books. This is a quote: "We are indeed dealing with a rather panicked conservation of the other as utterly inactive, but also as utterly uncompromised, as intact, as absolute. The symbolic order, which is principally our economic order, appears as a playground within which we are free to change anything we want, to play with different possibilities and endless variations. Yet we are utterly powerless in relation to the crucial parameters of this socio-economic structure itself." So, this deceptive adage, "there is no big other," is the furthest away possible from the Lacanian adage, "the big other lacks." The more we lament its demise, the stronger it is, and in order to shatter it, we would have to invent a strategy which would go, in a way, would have to go beyond playing the one side of the big other against the other. And our task, if we take the figures of Lacan and Hegel for our guidance, is more difficult than ever. And this is the only conclusion I can leave you with provisionally. Thank you.